So moving on to my panelists here. We've got Dr. Tamara Willis with us, Superintendent of Susquehanna Township School District, Pennsylvania. So glad to have you.
Thank you.
Again. Yes, and Dr. Lesli Meyers, Small Superintendent, Rochester City School District, New York. Hello, Dr. Meyers. Good to have you. And also Kris DeFilippis, who was with us earlier today. He's going to weigh in from his viewpoint as Director of Academic Response Team from Bronx Borough Office, New York City Department of Education. So the three of you are my illustrious panelists. We're going to have an awesome conversation. I want to start first with just going through, and maybe Kris, you could keep yours a little shorter only because we already got a little bit of color from you about what you're doing earlier. But I'm going to start with Dr. Willis. Give me concisely kind of what has been happening for you and a little bit about your district first, and then I'll.
Very good. So I'm Tamara Willis. I'm serving as in my 5th year superintendent of the Susquehanna Township School District. You're a small district, just under 3,000 students in grades K to 12. We're located in South Central Pennsylvania. I'm happy to report we are the most diverse district in the Commonwealth and the 15th most diverse in the country, even for those small numbers. We're currently focused on keeping our doors open, as I'm sure many superintendents are. This year, we returned approximately 98% of our learners to our buildings. So we're all under one roof. We're trying to keep the doors open, of course, notwithstanding the occasional quarantine. And so we're also making sure that those students who continue to be remote have access to the technology, to the instruction. And so we want to make sure that we're also looking at, and I heard this in the last conversation, the social and emotional development of our students and our staff, because we have noted some adverse effects of students being remote for a year. So we have really laser focused on having them return to in-person learning with some pro-social behaviors. So essentially that's kind of our focus right now, returning to the new normal. But I'm looking forward to hearing what others are doing today.
Okay, great. I love everything you just said. All right, so Dr. Meyers.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Lesli Meyers Small. I serve as the superintendent for Rochester, where we have about 24,000 students. We're the 3rd largest school district in the state of New York. Similar to Dr. Willis, we have returned the majority of our scholars back to brick and mortar attendance. That transition has been difficult for some of our scholars, and especially in the social emotional realm. We're seeing some behaviors certainly that are challenging. And we know that the pandemic certainly impacted us as adults in very unique ways. And so we're seeing that ripple effect now with our scholars, whether they're young or whether they're finishing their last year in our school district. We too have had a focus on social emotional learning for our scholars, but we also have equally fortified social emotional learning for adults because our adults are struggling. We had multiple violent attacks occur in our community last year, and we lost far too many scholars. So we certainly are dealing with the trauma of the pandemic, the trauma of adverse childhood experiences. And then we had a situation in Rochester where we had a gentleman by the name of Daniel Prude, and he died in the hands of, as the result of police custody. And so that played out in our city. It happened before the other notable situation, but it didn't come out until much later. And so that really did have an effect and impact on students and adults alike. We are also working very fervently to address the fact that some of our 9th graders really struggled. Having that first year of high school remote was difficult. So we're doing a lot of work with credit recovery, online credit recovery, after school recovery, students doubling up, et cetera. So because we know that will certainly have an impact on graduation 3 years from now. So we're really putting a lot of emphasis and focus on supporting those scholars. And again, we're just trying to help everyone transition back into brick and mortar attendance. And it's not been easy.
Yeah, rocky road for you. And then are you also challenged with potentially having to shut down again?
Well, we have what we're calling remote instructional pivot plans. So
Okay.
when students are test positive for COVID, we have a very specific plan in place of how the first day is asynchronous, and then we shift to remote learning. No, not with, we shift to asynchronous work online for the scholars, and they can make up their work. But we right now we have to my knowledge, as of a couple days ago, there's about 150 to 200 students who have tested positive in our district, but we're seeing it happen in our county with the districts who surround us. So that has been difficult. But we are not offering a remote option this year because our district was one of the few districts that really was remote for such a long time. We offer the remote option for those scholars where transportation has been compromised because of the driver shortage.
Yeah.
And we offer remote learning for medically fragile students, but we're really trying to push students getting back into school.
Okay. So similar situation we are hearing from all across the nation. Although, like I mentioned before you guys got on, California passed AB 1, and it requires every single district to have a fully online remote option because they're losing kids, in droves to onlines and privates and homeschooling. So excellent summary. Thank you for that. Kris, do you want to give a quick summary for yourself as well? Thank you so much for being with us.
Sure thing. Thank you so much. And it's great to meet you virtually, Dr. Meyers Small and Dr. Willis. So I'm an assistant superintendent here for the Bronx. And like what both Dr. Willis and Dr. Meyers Small shared, we've had our challenges of getting everyone back in our brick and mortar and dealing with social emotional learning and for both children and adults. And I've been paying particular attention to that and how goals for the year have been crafted with that in mind. And my role in particular is to kind of take all the work that we've been doing and make it actionable in schools. So it's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, excellent. Okay, so here's what we want to discuss first is that, there's a lot happening, and we're in the middle of an equity transformation, a digital transformation, and a pandemic at the same time, overburdened teachers and mass retirements. So this is sort of a perfect storm. So Learning Council has been leading the conversation about model. What is your model? And both the superintendents, and I think Kris, you could equally say this as well. You're in traditional model. You're back into the grade and class structure, manufacturing line that has always been. So I want to ask first, where have your thoughts gone to? And maybe I should share sort of what we showed as a model yesterday, just really quickly, so you can understand what Learning Council research has been saying about model. And then I want you to address where your thoughts have gone as well. But the new hybrid logistics, fully personalized, every student on their own path, intersection with teachers in an Uber way, like it's algorithmically inferred when you intersect in small group, whole group, or individually. This is the new, right, that's coming. So let's talk about your model and the struggles you're having with your model and where your thoughts have gone. I'm coming back to you, Dr. Willis, first.
So we are, I'll start by saying our mission statement is really comprised of 5 words, and that is the success of every learner. That's it.
Wow.
And because the world is fully customizing that user experience, we believe that public education must follow suit if we are to really remain relevant as an institution. And so we
I just
currently-
fell in love with you, Dr. Willis. That is awesome.
Yeah. Well, so we currently offer 3 instructional models to our families. They can learn in person. We have our fully cyber academy, but we also have a program that we call all remote access, or ARA. And through ARA, students can actually simultaneously learn with their peers from the safety of their homes. So last summer, we did not want parents to have to choose between a quality educational experience and their child's safety. So I asked our team in this summer, how can we make the learning experience of in-person learners mirror that of virtual learners? And of course, at the time, I didn't even know if the technology existed. And I almost gave my tech director a heart attack, but he was up for the challenge and he went out in search of the technology. We ended up partnering with Microsoft to use the Teams app, and also HP. They provided a camera system that allowed teachers to teach both virtually and in person at the same time. So students could raise their hands virtually. It's almost like a Zoom, but you also have this interface where the teacher can write on the whiteboard and the students at home can see it. So it was a pretty involved system. We offered it last year, and even though we have 98% of our learners returning, we're still offering all 3. So we still have students who are using ARA. They're at home, they're logging in every day. We have some medically fragile students that need it, but then we have some students who we found they actually thrived in that environment, which was odd. They had challenges in the face-to-face experience, but they actually were able to thrive in the virtual. So we felt, again, back to our mission statement, if this option is going to allow this group of learners to be successful, then we need to offer it. So we really kind of key into that user experience the way tech companies tend to do, and the way business tends to do, to make sure that we remain relevant. Again, not forgetting the human side of it, right? Because that's really the foundation. But we're looking to customize for our learners.
Yeah, I'm hearing that from almost all across the nation, but it's hard because like you've entered this matrix world of running 2 distribution mechanisms, right?
Yes.
And then trying to blend in between, because some students like, well, yeah, I want to be online all the time. But then, I want to come in when mom comes in for yoga class because we're 50 miles out from nowhere.
Yes.
I'm going to come in for my science labs, my hands-on other stuff. But other than that, I'm out.
Yep. Yep.
That's what's going on. It's like we want 100% flexibility like Amazon and, we
right. And none of the collective bargaining
right?
agreements allow for that, right?
Yeah.
Contracts don't allow.
Yeah. So this is tough, right? So, okay. Thank you so much for that viewpoint. So Dr. Meyers, did you see the screen of this hybrid logistics contemporary? So that's the new. Can you see it?
No.
Not.
Okay. All right. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the new. This is the old new, right? The old new is you can't be normal anyway now because you're living in this reality, which is your digital alongside your traditional scheduling model, but the calendar blew up on you, right? Like AB days, AB weeks, we're all going to be out Friday, or suddenly we have a surge and it's going to be weird. So that's where we've been. But when we're challenging you about your thinking, this is the farthest reach of total transformation with algorithmic logistics to put the small groups and the whole groups together with the teacher at the appropriate point in a very precision use of humans so that they can be glorified for their teacher humanity at the best point. So have you thought about kind of model stuff so far, or am I throwing you for a loop? I don't mean to catch you off guard.
Well, let me just talk a little bit about what we started the school year fully remote last year, the 2021 school year. And so what we did, so everyone was online and we were engaging with scholars. So our school year last year was delayed for a few days so we could make sure that we had the appropriate professional development to get all of our staff prepared. Mm-hmm. In January, we slowly started bringing students back. So we brought students back 4 days a week who had significant disabilities, students with disabilities. And so that was 4 days a week. But those students who chose not to come in were still online. So we had simultaneous instruction going on.
Oh, okay.
So, and so it worked for some and it didn't work for others, but that's where we were at the point. And then in February, we brought back elementary students, K through 6, regular education. And it was 2 days in, and then an async day on one day, and then 2 days online, and then we flip-flop. So
Okay.
students were either in on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, and then it was switched. And again, that was a simultaneous instruction. Yes.
Yeah,
The
that's that model.
So,
Yeah.
and so again, it worked for some of our educators and others it did not. And so we now again are close to 100% of our scholars are learning in person, brick and mortar, but we've prepared for the fact that we may have to make some pivots. And so we are trying to go back to the research and best practice. So I would love to take a look at some of these different models to see and to know what other people are specifically doing. Simultaneous was a struggle. Some teachers, it was perfectly fine for them, and others just said it's just really difficult. Was very difficult to maneuver. But we're really trying to focus now on the fact we're calling it unfinished learning in Rochester, right? Because we know that each one of our scholars, they learned something during the pandemic, whether it's some interpersonal skills. I mean, some of our scholars were getting themselves up in the morning, right? And they had a lot of other learning that was going on in their home. So as we move to shift to in-person attendance, knowing that COVID was increasing as well, we know that the social emotional aspect was really important. And we're seeing that our scholars need those connections. So our focus has been on access and engagement with grade level content every day for every student. And we're just really trying to apply the strength-based approach that our students did learn something, right? And that we're trying to uplift that and incorporate that into what we do in culturally relevant ways. But our model that we most recently used was the simultaneous traditional.
Yeah, and I can understand exactly where you're coming from. You're running a big battleship, and that's good. I'm glad you had some success with that. So that's awesome. All right, so I'm going to go to Kris, and I'm going to come back to you guys and talk about student agency. That's the next theme we want to run today. But I'm going to go to Kris. Hybrid logistics contemporary. Is this the first time you're seeing this model, Kris?
Yeah, it might be the first time I'm seeing it in this way.
Okay. This is a complex idea for a lot of people, but it's really not far off of the really small schools you all heard about, right? That are running a program in private education. If they only have 2 teachers and every kid's on an individual thing in their different grades. So they don't lecture, they guide. Different than you want to do in public. You're still going to always have some lecture. But what are your thoughts about model? What are the pressures? I know you spoke earlier and you highlighted some of them, but what do you see as the pressures sort of driving the conversation around model?
Yeah, I would say that I'm encouraged by the number of models and particularly by this model. So first and foremost, this really seems to me like what jumps out to me is taking the context into consideration and really trying to understand that, what students needs, what students need, what families need, what school communities need. And this feels like at first glance, feels like a really strong avenue to unearth that and sort of do this archaeological dig on what, students really need. This also, you mentioned this talk about return to normal, and what that looks like, and all that. And this probably it's a time that we don't really want to return to normal. And there's real tension there because, folks sort of want that psychological safety and comfort of knowing that we do this and we go to school and this is how our country works, right? Or how civilization works, right? And that's kind of what we do. But this is also a real time when we can, in the midst of conversations around racial equity and sexual orientation equity and things like that. In the midst of this like conversation that has bubbled up once again in our country, maybe this is a real time to rethink why we do education and how we do it and sort of what we're doing it for, and move away from some of the old traditional models based in meritocracy and based in this hierarchical nature, and instead kind of move towards new possibilities and sort of meeting the needs of our new century and well, I guess it's not new anymore, but of a 21st century model and just something different. So I would say, yeah, this just looking over it quickly here, it seems like a real way to center those needs and unique needs of communities and of students.
Okay, good. So I want to thank you for that comment. That was awesome. I just want to bring up and highlight one thing. Lambertville ISD in California, some of the charters off of San Diego are already doing this, but they're doing it in what's called the hybrid high flex model, which is traditional, simultaneous, like you, Dr. Meyers, and then they're carving out several hours a day to move to the Uberized hybrid logistics model. It's for remediation. Kids way behind in math, ahead in language, they only need this, and extracurricular, or electives, right? So longer homeroom time, essentially. So that's really what we predict the nation will go first. They won't flip the ship entirely overnight to something as extreme as hybrid logistics. So I want to go back to the premise of all of this, because all of you guys have mentioned student agency. So or equity, right? So the digital traditional model, and this is just a viewpoint, and you can contradict it all you want, but student agency was a gift during the pandemic because every kid, and most of them did, suddenly had to chart their own thing, right? And they're, get out of bed, get online, do their thing, right? So suddenly they weren't just listening to the bell ring and getting up and going to the next class. It's like, they weren't little automatons moving along the manufacturing line. They had to get into it and get involved, right? In a big way that also is tied to equity, right? Suddenly discovering that you're in charge of yourself is a revolution for a lot of kids. So we know that the traditional model is focused on this little bullet point right under that one is build to create identical outcomes. And it individualizes only within narrow parameters. So let's talk about student agency as what we had out of that. And it's tied to equity and what that means now going forward. Because if model shifts, it may solve the biggest inequity there ever has been, which is everybody's not the same. Maybe one student's super behind in math, but he's way ahead in language. Why don't we have algorithms that automatically adjust his schedule to over-focus him on math for a semester and under-focus him on language? Why aren't we doing that? No. We got to have everybody on the normal pace. Everybody's the same. They all got to move along the same, and that's the way it is. Okay, so let's talk about that agency and that model shift and that, equity issue is like sort of a bundle. All right, Dr. Willis.
Oh, that is so interesting that you brought up student agency. That's actually one of our strategic initiatives over the next 3 years. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of customized learning as an instructional framework, but that's something that we've started about 2 years ago. We started by reading the book by Carol Dweck, Mindset. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with Mindset. And then we went on to read the book Mass Customized Learning. It's called Inevitable, and that's by Chuck Schwan and B. McGarvey. It was a district-wide read of both books, and it basically focused on this idea that the traditional system has been in place. It's a very industrialized model, but it is increasingly failing students. And so one of our goals for this year and for the next 3 years is to really focus on this theory of learner agency. There is a rubric of learner agency through technology and innovation in education. It's a collaborative. And there's a rubric there, and it has three sections. One is mindset, the other is know-how, and then the other one is action. And what we found moving through this rubric and looking at some of those indicators was that learners don't come to school with all of these behaviors. They don't come to school with these attributes. And so just like we teach character education or we teach social and emotional skills, we are now in a position to teach our learners how to have agency. And so we're actually, it's interesting, I did not know you were even going to talk about agency today, but I'm glad you did. We actually are actively working to teach and develop learner agency across the district, right? Because we know that when learners have agency, they understand themselves as learners. They feel like they have power to make things happen. They can plan and then monitor their progress. And most of all, they learn to think independently. Mm-hmm. And so we're using that rubric of learner agency. And this year, students will be meeting with their advisors. So every student has an advisor that's K to 12 right now. We're still in the early stages. There'll be goal setting, there'll be conversations. And this year we're focusing on the portion that deals with resiliency, because that is something that we found our learners are lacking when they are met with any kind of a challenge or resistance. They shut down or they wait for an adult to come and give them the answer. And so this year, our focus is on resiliency. And the way that we're planning to measure it, we're using the rubric, but we want to make it age appropriate for our K2 and 3-5 learners. But we're going to be developing age appropriate surveys based on that rubric. And we're going to administer those twice a year just to measure whether or not students are self-reporting increases in agency, because we believe that is going to be a foundational piece going forward, no matter which model we adopt.
Yeah, so I can imagine questions like, I'm in class and I have a question. I raise my hand, the teacher says, I'll get to you. And then the class ends. What do I do? 1, I ignore it. I didn't get my question answered. I'm over it. 2, I stand there and wait until the teacher answers. I can imagine what you're looking at, because, agency means I'm going to get my answer. I'm sorry, you're muted. You're muted. Sorry, Tamara.
That is okay. Look, I get one a day. That was my one for the day. One of the questions, to your point, just says, I can coach myself to work through setbacks constructively, right? So if I don't get my hand acknowledged, I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to find another way to get that need met. And so we're working through the language of the rubric so that we can put it into kid language and then they can report back to us.
Would you share that with us after you run it? And
absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Love that, because we could get it out nationally. Okay, great. All right. So moving on to Dr. Meyers, your thoughts on this same sort of conversation topic.
So I'd like to shift it just slightly.
Okay.
And talk about it through the lens of student voice and really uplifting that into the conversations, rather the decision making that I make as a superintendent, and that whether it's the school board or principals or other leaders. Mm-hmm. And so we have made some shifts as far as how do we really get that student voice to influence the type of curriculum that we offer, the courses that we offer, the type of food that we're, serving in the cafeteria, et cetera. So again, coming from the perspective that we were very concerned about the social emotional needs of our scholars, we launched a survey towards the end of the school year that was entitled Your Voice, Your Matters. And so we launched this with students in grades 6 through 12. And we didn't make it long because we were worried about survey fatigue and not having students complete it. And we wanted to just know some of the things that they had experienced. Were they learning online, or were they doing the hybrid model? Were they, had they witnessed any type of violence? How was the pandemic impacting them? Who do they most feel connected with, et cetera? So we took a look at that, and we wanted that information certainly to help us plan for the way that we were going to use our ARP and our CURSA funds from the federal government. So that was helpful. But then over the summer, we did something that I am so excited about, and I'll be talking more about that. I have a couple of upcoming presentations. We launched a student voice, a photo voice rather project. This is where scholars went out into the community. We received a grant for this, and they were paid to be qualitative researchers in essence.
Wow.
So they went out, they had their camera phone, and they went out and they captured pictures in different zip codes in the city of Rochester. And so they were responding to questions about what concerns you, where do you feel safe, where do you not feel safe, what bothers you, what is concerning for you, who are the supports that you have in your life. They took pictures, and then they had their pictures posted, and I actually went to their showcase where they took the most amazing pictures that would absolutely just blow your mind. And so, like, I remember one picture, and this is no knock against law enforcement, but the way that they took the picture and the way that captioned it said, I'm supposed to feel safe, but this picture right here makes me feel very conflicted. And literally, we paid them to be qualitative researchers over the summer from a student perspective. And so I went to each table with each scholar, and they very eloquently and articulately could share with me what the experience was like. They were like, please continue this. We'd like to have more students be involved with this, but it was very, very powerful. And it just gave me really good insight into what's on their mind, what concerns them, where they feel safe, where they don't. And it was powerful. And so how incredible of an experience was it for them? They learned to take in light and how to capture angles. So we had a professional photographer come in and work with them. They each were in groups, small groups, where they had a mentor and they talked through their concerns. We also had social emotional support embedded into that because some of the things certainly were concerning to them. But I'm telling you, it was so incredibly powerful. And it was, I'm looking forward to us replicating this. And I really would like to turn this into a class where students can get credit and we can have this as a part of the portfolio. If I could make this a mandated class, I absolutely would. We'll start with elective, but we're trying to see if this could be some type of independent study or definitely, but also an upper level course. But every single scholar that I spoke to said what a positive, enriching, empowering situation and experience that they were involved in. So that again helps to influence and give me good information and knowledge about decision making as it relates to what students want and what they don't want in their school experience. So I know it's a little bit of a bird walk, but I feel like it is definitely tangentially related. And this was the question that I could get that in. Yeah,
that's awesome. I'm pretty sure you have people on your staff that can crosswalk that into every subject.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure, which would be marvelous. And then you can make it a requirement, my dear Lesli. It'll be awesome, right? Thank you so much, because you're really giving color to what agency really means right now to this generation, because they're another generation than us, right? So they're into it. Okay, so Kris, your comments in this whole agency business and equity business.
Sure. So we also have been trying to center student voice, and it's a big city to do that with 1.2 million kids. But one of the things that we conducted over the last few months was empathy interviews, where we gathered teachers with students and school leaders to talk about their experiences over the last year and a half or 2 years, and kind of really dig down on, all right, like, how do we pivot from here based on what you've experienced and what you've learned about yourself and your community, and kind of move on from there. We didn't do anything as amazing as, having them be their own researchers, and that's amazing. But trying to center their, student voice and lift that up, because that has been a real learning over the last, I guess, 2 years. And, as we were sort of talking about this, I was thinking about, yes, that there's a real need for student agency. Like, that should probably be the goal. But students don't exist in this vacuum, and it just kept hitting me that that there has to also be a shift in adult beliefs around how students show up in the classroom, and it has to be a little bit of a shift away from this sort of like hierarchical stance, I guess, and more into a collaborative approach. And that's a nuanced conversation, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But I do think that really begins with shifting, hearts and minds, belief sets of adults, and sort of this collective efficacy that the adults who interact with kids kind of come into contact with. And Dr. Willis, as you were listing off some of the texts you've been reading, I was thinking about some of ours. One of the ones that jumped out at me as you were talking was we've had our team read the End of Average by Todd Rose, and
Yes.
thinking about that prompted us to think about, like, all right, well, education is kind of made for like the quote unquote average student.
Yes.
But there really is no average student, right? So it's, there's so many different variables, and we're all human, and that, just centering the human aspect of education, I think, is what's really behind that student voice push.
Yes.
Like, giving students agency is centering their humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, Kris, as you were talking about the adults. That's really where we felt our work had to begin, because we set the environment within which these learners are hopefully going to thrive. And if we don't believe it as adults, they pick up on that very quickly.
Very quickly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, good,
Yeah.
good, excellent comments, excellent points. And all three of you, what I want to sort of end off this whole session with is, you are leading that social emotional thing, even with the adults who are having a rough time. This is rough. You've gained some wisdom along the way. Can you share some with our audience now? Go ahead, Dr. Willis.
Oh my. I think the two words that come to mind are empathy and grace. Those are two things and two words that resonated with me as our team moved through these past 18 months. We threw so much at our teachers. The learning curve was the steepest I have ever witnessed in my educational career. We had asked folks who had been in a very traditional model to all of a sudden become virtual teachers overnight. And so I, as the leader of the district, needed to remain mindful that I needed to be empathetic to those folks who are really giving their all to make this successful. And also just extend a little grace for those people who are struggling and may need some additional time. So that has really gotten us through, just remembering that we're all humans, and change is difficult no matter where you are in the organization. But if we can just extend some of that to each other, I think we all come out better. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So Dr. Meyers.
Sure. So I would agree with everything that Dr. Willis said, for sure. I'll just add mine on. Certainly the use of technology. We learned that even our youngest scholars in kindergarten could use the technology, and I saw some incredible learning happening when I would visit school, Zoom rooms, if they were learning on Seesaw or through Google Classroom. And I really had the nice opportunity. I took advantage of the fact that we were on Zoom. So I got in, I read to classrooms online, and right, like you could just see as I was joining the lesson, what they were doing. So technology certainly, and that some students did thrive online. I would talk to my principal leaders who said, some of the hormonal things that happen in middle school, for example, that was just completely cut out, and that was not a problem. And so that absolutely, in some instances, was certainly like a lesson learned, that being in an online environment cut that down. In some instances, there was better collaboration, communication between educators. And because all of our meetings were online, we had better attendance at parent-teacher conferences and open houses and even board meetings, right? We had more folks joining us because they did not have to come in person. It also gave all of us an opportunity just to be incredibly reflective about the practice of the superintendency, of being a principal, of being a third grade teacher, or a special education teacher. So that was something that certainly was uplifted during this time.
Mm-hmm.
Lessons learned of things that maybe didn't go so well. Certainly, remote learning does not work for some students, and it was very painfully clear in some instances that just was not the case. Mm-hmm. Certainly, student engagement became an issue, right? So you didn't have to turn your camera on. We don't know if you were listening or if just the camera was on. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, engagement was an issue. And just we learned how important social emotional supports, counselors, social workers, psychologists, and I'll end on this point, and that everybody has the ability to do that. I started as an educator, as a high school counselor. That's how I entered into education. Yes, I have been trained to use unconditional positive regard and mediate and things of that nature. You don't, however, have to be a counselor to be kind, to engage, to check in with scholars. And that's something that we've been trying to just make sure that everyone understands, that in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, that social emotional supports is everyone's responsibility.
Wow, that was beautiful. I have the image as you're saying that despite the fact that we were physically all kept apart, we actually grew together. We all felt a common experience, and it evolved us into a higher level of love and empathy, and
yes,
like you're saying, and a willingness to be kind, maybe than we would have had if there was never a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost, we're getting this boomerang effect that is so positive, so positive. Mm-hmm. So thank you for saying that. All right, Kris, final comments.
Well, I love getting to go last here because I get to hear Dr. Willis and Dr. Meyers. So I'm gonna underscore and highlight and echo as loudly as possible everything that both Dr. Willis and Dr. Meyers shared. And I'm gonna add on as a final word the sense of urgency. I think one of the things that I learned over this pandemic is that it didn't erase any sort of inequalities in our school system, and in fact, it probably highlighted them, and it probably really made them bright and bold in a lot of cases, and particularly for our Black and Brown students, and in that way, there's so much urgency in what we're doing and how in our role as educators that we really can't fence it on any of this, and I truly believe that as an educational leader, sort of in this field, that when I come into work every day, I'm either helping to erase inequities and systemic oppression and racism and things like that sort of permeate through our educational system, or I'm totally complicit in those things, and particularly as a white male in this setting. So I I think that urgency is something that really has been highlighted, that as educators, we're on the, you know, I don't like this term, but we're on the front lines of you know, what we do here in this country, maybe more so than anyone else. And it's on us to do what we can to sort of demonstrate and showcase the brilliance of our students.
Well, thank you for that comment, and all three of you for being with us today. This was an awesome conversation. Can't wait to get it out to our 315,000 viewers. You know, 75% of our audience are people just like you. They're an administrative layer. And they'll be watching these videos that we record at midnight in their time zone, because, you know, that's the thing happening with all of you right now. You're super busy. So your time is very precious. And thank you so much for sharing it with us today. We really value it. And my staff will make sure that you guys get mailed some print copies of that leadership versus systemic inequities special report I showcased some slides on, because that whole report is about the model shift and how maybe model is a pivotal thing we need to do to address, a little bit like what you were just saying, Kris. Systemic inequity is there. We've identified as Learning Council research, the biggest inequity we have is the structure itself. It's built to try to normalize, and it's not working. So with that said, I am going to just say again, thank you to everyone, and our sponsors, Inclusive, ClassLink, ViewSonic, Booker, VHS Learning, who was new to me, I'm like wowed by them, and learning.com, also wowed. I was wowed by Booker. Thank all of them for being with us. Thank you for joining us. And that's all I have for you today. So I'm releasing you back into the wild. Carry on with your greatness, and hope to see you when we actually come back physically. Bergen's going to host next year, so we can come back physically again, and hopefully see everyone and bring your staffs and have a valuable day. Our next year's discussion will be focused on data literacy. So with that said, thank you again. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Nice meeting everyone.
Yes, same.